Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a critical look, Canada's role abroad weekly. We're at about 167, something like that, weeks. And there's a lot of developments again this week and I think some interesting sort of big picture dynamics happening with what Mark Carney is saying and not doing, and get to that in a bit. First of all, there's a story in La Presse about how the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere went from 285 parts per million in 1850 to 430. I remember when we passed the 400 mark. It wasn't that long ago, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, maybe. And they the story part of the point of the story was that the Earth's in a decreasing ability to absorb carbon emissions. So we are really going forward quickly here on the climate crisis. This week, the U.S. designated the Vivre Ensemble, the gang coalition in Port-au-Prince, a transnational terrorist group. And I haven't looked into it closely, but my understanding is that the implications could be quite substantive because they have so much influence in Port-au-Prince that like almost everything that comes out of Haiti in one way or another could be they could have something to do with. And so this has the potential to be quite damaging to Haiti. I don't know where the Canadian government is on that, but obviously Canadian policy and U.S. policy in Haiti tend to be quite aligned. The Globe business section had a story titled EDC Eyes Major Role in Funding of Critical Minerals, and that's Export Development Canada, which is the export credit agency and insurance kind of firm, Crown Corporation. And they are apparently, I mean, they're huge in mining. And the story talks about a bunch of international in Chile. I forget the other countries, but they name a couple of other countries where EDC is looking at financing so-called critical minerals. And this, of course, all kind of ties into the U.S. and China whole question. Um, and it's also just one other element of like the Canadian global mining juggernaut is not just a sort of private affair, right? EDC is involved in all kinds of ways in facilitating, and that's just one of the government agencies involved in facilitating Canadian global mining expansion, extraction, ecological, and all the other human rights and that come with those operations. There's a webinar on Wednesday titled I'm not sure the exact title, but the promotion I saw, Panamanians address renewed efforts to reopen a Canadian copper mine, and that's that huge First Quantum mine. I've talked about this in previous weeks. It's There's now a whole new push to get this back opened, and there's also a counter push of organizing to oppose restarting it's just a gigantic operation. I don't remember the exact $20 billion. I mean, it's huge. I forget the exact number, but it's a very major and quite substantive part of Panama's economy. And it's the opposition to it was I think the biggest social movement since the effort to get the Panamanian Canal returned to the country from the U.S. Alex Terrell, the leader of the Green Party of Quebec, has this story about the leader of the the co-president of the Green Party Youth Wing, and and he's talked about this a bit. I think I mentioned it maybe in a previous episode, but this guy's got like a whole. He's like I think he's the president or the co-president or some, I forget the title position with the NATO Association of Canada Youth. And he's the Terrell has a picture of him. He's 16, firing a semi-automatic weapon while leaning on a NATO flag. And this guy, people can check out Terrell's post on Facebook, which I reposted on my Facebook, and I think he's got it. I think it's on Twitter and maybe some other places. And this guy's like this he calls himself a Zionist. He's the serious militarist, and this is the co-president of the youth wing of the Green Party, which is really, I think, quite outrageous. At some point you ask yourself, what's the point of the Green Party if you're just going to be like the Liberal Party on foreign policy, and that's clearly what Jonathan Pettineau was. If you're just going to be like the sort of the right-wing elements of the NDP, what's the point of the party? The notion that the NATO is a ecologically sustainable organization is absurd. I mean, it's this arm of US-led aggression that has destroyed ecosystems, not to mention, human life in many countries in wars of aggression. And it's about maintaining inequality within our world. And of course, it certainly has nothing to do with peace as a alliance of aggression. So the idea that this fits with purported Green Party values is quite remarkable. Someone emailed me. He's working on a book about Canada's relationship to the Khmer Rouge, and the title is "The Skull Behind the Face: A Popular History of Canada-Cambodian Relations, 1970-1986." It's not history that I know much about, but apparently Canada was quite supportive of the Khmer Rouge. And Yeah, anyways, it seems interesting. Obviously, the Khmer Rouge has been very demonized, and they were responsible for substantive uh, rights violations. But for geopolitical reasons, Ottawa apparently really backed them including maintaining their position at the UN. I don't know much about this history, but I thought I'd mention this book. I don't know when exactly it's going to be released, but it seems interesting. Um, the Carney and Trump had a conversation after Carney was won the election. I guess we haven't had a episode since then. I kind of forgot that. It seems so long ago now. But Obviously, it was a minority government, but not far from the 172 seats needed. And Carney had a conversation with Trump. Ultimately, obviously, NDP doing so badly, and some of the better MPs like Matthew Green or Nikki Ashton losing. That was a very unfortunate. Also, someone like Paul Manley not winning out in Nanaimo, which was, I think, a possibility. That's also quite unfortunate. But the specifics of a liberal minority where the NDP has the balance of power is the NDP balance of power. All things considered, at least it's not a Poilievre government, certainly, and not a Poilievre majority. Poilievre losing his seat. There's it's not a good election result, but it's not that bad. um, but uh, but in the aftermath, Carney had a meeting with Trump. I thought it was interesting that they explicitly in the U.S. Statement about it. They say we look forward to working with Prime Minister Carney's government, particularly on key issues: trade fairness, combating illegal immigration, halting the flow of fentanyl and other dangerous drugs, and countering the Chinese Communist Party influence in our hemisphere. I thought it was interesting. that was so strongly put in the U.S. statement about this meeting of this countering Chinese Communist Party influence in our hemisphere. Because you don't, the other issues are sort of talked about a lot publicly, but the Chinese one is a little bit less discussed. There was also a story about how, in the possibility of renegotiating the CUSMA or the NAFTA or whatever you want to call the trade agreement, um, that there was a Globe business story saying that Trump will seek even more restrictions on Canada's ability to sign trade agreements with China when Washington and Ottawa start renegotiations on the trade agreement. So there was already thing that Trump got pushed into the CUSMA agreement about non-market economies, I believe. I forget the exact language, but basically was designed to say that Canada couldn't sign a trade agreement with China, uh, and apparently Trump wants to go even further with that in these upcoming negotiations. This is all part of this anti-China kind of policy sweeping. The New York Times front page of the uh, last Sunday, which I only was able to read on Tuesday at the library, was a piece titled "He Chases a Seat in Canada, China Chases Him," and it's about the Tai, who runs the YouTube channel, the Hong Kong YouTube channel. I'm forgetting his first name right now, and uh, and just to give a sense of kind of like how sort of serious the New York Times, takes this whole question of like Chinese kind of interference in Canada. It's been a couple times been on the front page of the New York Times, and this was another one of those. Um, I think I don't know much about the guy's YouTube channel. It seems pretty dubious that the Chinese government would put a $150,000 or whatever exact number is, uh, quote unquote bounty for somebody, some political dissident to turn him into, Chinese authorities. That seems quite dubious. So I'm not in any way defending the government's position on this, but nonetheless, the scope to which this has drawn attention, both in the Canadian media and now in the New York Times, seems a little bit out of proportion. Uh, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is pushing this report about Canada sort of dropping its one China policy and really deepening ties with Taiwan. That we've seen a fair bit of that. That kind of there was a, I think it was National Post or the Globe. I'm forgetting where the op-ed was. The former Canadian military official who was part of that delegation that went to Taiwan, of a whole bunch of sort of former top Canadian intelligence. I think we made some politicians, military types. That was sort of a kind of quasi-official. It was not certainly not an official Canadian delegation, but it sort of had a kind of quasi-official element to it, and it was really about this sort of deepening Canadian ties with Taiwan as part of shifting. I mean, really, as part of the U.S. policy of trying to stoke conflict with China. That's clearly the big picture, but specifically about deepening ties with Taiwan. Uh, the Yellow Peril Collective published this big statement to the uh, Heritage Minister, complaining about their funding for this report on PRC foreign interference and transnational repression in Canada. And the uh, the Yellow Peril Collective uh, goes at it for basically being kind of stoking a kind of McCarthyite climate. There was a story from the States where it's like I think it was like over 25% of Americans basically see Chinese as a threat, and the Yellow Peril Collective is kind of um, honing in on this notion of CSIS as this sort of reliable outlet of information rather than a highly politicized, obviously pro-US intelligence agency that has a whole history of dubious political practices from, it comes out of the RCMP and the whole targeting of Quebec sovereigntist nationalist movement and all kinds of dirty tricks they did there. But then, of course, with the so-called war on terror and the anti-Muslim, anti-Arab kind of post 9/11 climate, and now bringing this into today, up to today, with this sort of turning Chinese Canadians as really being a target, which of course we're seeing a lot of. Um, there was a story in I think it was no, a responsible statecraft. I saw it on antiwar.com about global powers boost military budgets by record percent. And it was all about the huge increase in military spending around the world, US, Russia, Japan, China's increasing, most of the NATO countries, etc. And it's obviously grim. This is really grim for humanity's perspective. But one of the things that I thought was interesting, and I made a comment about this, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and I was kind of thinking it as I was saying it about different parts of the world and military spending. So we have this huge, we got to increase military spending. There's so much danger. That's the storyline in Canada. I was just listening to Mark Carney saying that all this new danger. And what this report shows is that yes, that militarist ethos is sweeping much of the planet, but it basically says that in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and in Latin America, that's not the case. There's no, in fact, they said in the sub-Saharan Africa, it's actually a decrease in military spending. And in Latin America, it's basically it's just flatline. There's no increase, which I think says a lot about geopolitics and where you choose to align and how you choose to see the world and the like. I would argue that the Canadian increased fear or security risk is a overwhelmingly irrational, manufactured. If irrational is not exactly the right word, because it is rational in the sense that it's because Canada's part of NATO, Canada aligns with the U.S. empire, Canada's part of its belligerence, of course, but from the strictly security sense, irrational, maybe with the exception of growing threats from the U.S. Um, but I thought that was kind of interesting. Uh, there was a piece in that Marc Parent, who's the CEO of CAE, the flight simulation company here based in Montreal. A couple months ago, I went to their board meeting or I don't know what meeting was. I questioned him on their training of Israeli pilots bombing Gaza. That was kind of an interesting little questioning session. But anyways, he has an op-ed in I think it was the Financial Post. Canadian aerospace defense must be prioritized in our uncertain world. And what was interesting, it's really, I mean, it's written from a militarist perspective, but he's basically showing how the government subsidy and government procurement and militarism is the basis of the aerospace sector in Montreal mostly, but in Canada in general. And he just sort of details all these ways in which CAE and other aerospace companies basically are just that the military has been central to their rise and continues to be very important to them, which is of course part of what military spending has always been about, which is an indirect subsidy to the corporate sector and a way for the government to stimulate sort of high tech and cutting edge kind of research. The Puglisi had a piece in the Ottawa Citizen a few days ago. D&D set to consider only U.S. supplied night vision equipment, and there's $100 million contract, and apparently the D&D has kind of pushed out the European contractors and is just focusing on U.S. contractors. And the point that Puglisi is making, which he's made in different examples of this many times over the past few months, is that Carney will make this rhetoric of, oh, we got to back away from the U.S., and then the military just continues on uh, with purchasing U.S. equipment, continues on with their alliance with the U.S. And even on the area that Carney has spoke out about most clearly, which is the F-35, the reviewing of the F-35, and the like. Still, the military DND just kind of continue down that pathway, let alone the broader dynamic, which I'll get into in a second. And and that gets to one of the things that Carney said on Monday night in his election victory. He said the old relationship with the U.S. is over, and this is the things have changed. And he's made that point repeatedly. The Liberal Party election platform had variation of that in it, and so he's saying, we're over with this U.S. relationship now. Canada's part of a training mission with the U.S. with the Philippines, targeting China right now, big training mission, exercise, should I say. There, Canadian naval vessels with U.S., Canadian officers training, Operation Prospective Guardian, the bombing of Yemen. Canada's got a handful of officers part of that. It's officially one of 7, I think it is, countries part of that. The Operation Proteus in the West Bank, it's specifically tied to the U.S. Security coordinator training mission to build up the security force to oversee Israel's occupation of the West Bank. I listed, I had a piece that I'm going to publish in a little bit here, a bunch of other examples of ongoing, let alone getting to bigger things, of NORAD, the hundreds of agreements with the Canada-U.S. military, G7, NATO, etc., Five Eyes. So it's all basically continuing. But so the base of this relationship, U.S. empire power projection, but yet you have Carney making these declarations. Now, the declarations are being made because the public wants that, right? The public is uncomfortable with the U.S. The public wants a response to Donald Trump, and so Carney makes these declarations. But when you dig in, there's basically no substance behind, or very little behind that, even on the area which he's been kind of most clear about, which is the procurement and procuring from U.S. arms companies, even there, and which of course has a direct connection to the trade war. I mean, it's an obvious bargaining chip in the trade war kind of context. Even on that area, the military just continues down the pathway of purchasing from the U.S. Doesn't even do the minimal of what Carney's saying of, like, we're going to focus more on Europe, let alone demilitarizing or focusing elsewhere in the world, whatever, right? The other NATO countries is where they want to go. So of course it's deeply, it's very deceptive, and I would say approaching lying that Carney's doing. And now the other part of this Carney kind of emerging foreign policy rhetoric is, so on Friday he has a meeting with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and he says, spoke with Guterres today, in this time of rising conflict, Canada is ready to lead. We will build coalitions, defend democracy, and stand up for our values on the world stage. As others step back from global leadership, Canada is stepping up. So this notion of we need more Canada. Now, Canada is still heavily involved in assisting the U.S. empire's power projection, militarily speaking, intelligence speaking, and other ways. Now, of course, the world does not need more U.S. empire power projection. Now, I would say a step further that the world doesn't need more Canada. And beyond, like, even if Canada was to genuinely disassociate from the U.S. empire, which, quite honestly, if you had a government that really wanted to do that today, it would take many, many years for that to play itself out. Unless there was a really, revolutionary, radical, and probably arguably even not desirable a way of doing that. I think much preferable if it was done in a much, methodical, steady reform, deep reform kind of way, rather than some sudden break. But anyways, so of course Canada is, so long as it's assisting U.S. empire, it's not It's not, the world doesn't need more Canada. But then if you get into even the more, let's call it the more independent elements of Canadian foreign policy, for instance, the mining sector, uh, this is not, the US is not putting Canada up to being a global mining behemoth. This is principally Canadian capitalist interests, histories and dispossessions of Indigenous and the landscape of Canada and other things that explain why Canada is the position it is in global mining, and obviously all kinds of legislative decisions, taxing and other policies. But that's overwhelmingly a sort of Canadian relationship to the world, and it's a very destructive ecologically human rights relationship. Now, the other thing that Carney seems to be doing in this foreign policy shift is in building in reinforcing his Canadian nationalism. And as I've stated before, I'm sympathetic to using this upsurge of Canadian nationalism to try to break away, anti-US Canadian nationalism, to break away from Canada's relationship to the US empire. I think that's generally a progressive thing, and we should exploit some of this shift in thinking on Trump and US and all this stuff to push that. I think that's something we've done actually not a pretty poor job of sort of exploiting. We should do much more on that front. But what Carney seems to be pushing is this other form of Canadian nationalism, which includes, of course, what he announced also on Friday, I believe, was the King doing the speech from the throne at the end of the month on, I believe, May 27th. So the British monarch is going to come, and the statement that was put out by the Governor General of this talks about, like, in the context of this shift in the world, we need to deepen our ties with, forget the exact word, but allies for democracy, peace, and something. So according to our Governor General, the British King represents democracy and peace. I'm not sure what, I mean, peace is comical, but at least you could, I don't know, somehow make an argument. The notion that a king represents democracy, now that's a whole other thing. But anyways, that's the state of the discussion. So you have this kind of like Carney as a reinforced Canadian nationalism playing to our roots, and there hasn't been a king or a queen who's done a speech from the throne apparently since 1977. So this is a fairly new development, a play to Canada's British colonial monarchical history and obviously current reality. And so the notion that the world needs more of the British Empire or return to that kind of stuff, which arguably is tied to what he's doing, is of course totally absurd. There was a piece in the New York Times from, I don't know if it's the head of Leger Marketing or one of the Canadian marketing firms. I forget which one, not polling firm, should I say? And he said Canadians like to see themselves as polite peacekeepers, but there's a worrying gap between how we view our influence globally versus how the rest of the world sees it. In a survey last year, just over half of Canadians said their country was viewed positively in world affairs. While not a direct comparison, by contrast, a global Fulbright Foundation survey conducted around the same time found that fewer than 1/3 of respondents said Canada used its influence around the world, quote, mostly for good. That's very interesting. I haven't had a chance to check out both of those polls. That 50% of Canadians saying Canada is a force for good is way down. And that doesn't surprise me it's down. That seems even further than I would have thought. When I did the Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy in 2009, I quoted a survey, it was like 87%. And there's some other polling at that time that said similar type numbers. And I believe it's down a lot. The loss of both Security Council seats contribute to that. I think the Gaza genocide contributed to that. Harper contributed to that. The fact that Trudeau, kind of just continued. So those numbers seem a little bit, I would be surprised if it's down to 50%. If you have the same question as back in 2007, 2008, whatever I quoted there in the Black Book. But nonetheless, I expect that it's down. The other side to that, I also think is fascinating. If it's down to under third, or saying a third of the world's responded saying that Canada's uses influence mostly for good, that also is, I think, quite interesting, and that undermines a lot of the mythology and what Carney's trying to sell, right? This world needs more Canada thing that was pretty aggressively in the Liberal Party platform, and Carney's made comments to that effect in a few occasions recently, including, like I said, with the Secretary General of the UN on Friday, pretty aggressively. Now, the fanatic genocidal Jewish supremacist state is onslaught just continues, and looks like today, I think the Knesset announced a plan to uh, get call up, I think, tens of thousands more reservists and a full occupation of Gaza again. And they, of course, bombed the drone, the flotilla in Malta. With Greta Thunberg was supposed to be on there. I mean, this is just a completely lawless country. Obviously, we're seeing this horrendous starvation uh, policy that's playing itself out in more and more horrible kind of ways. Bombing Yemen aggressively today. That was just the last couple hours coming out, and and you have a situation where Toronto and Ottawa, hours, 2 days or whatever it is, exactly after Amnesty calls it a live stream genocide, you have them, these cities raising the Israeli flag. I mean, it's just unbelievable. The fidelity towards Israel is just completely mind-numbing. I mean, amidst this horror after horror after horror, with Israeli propagandists online saying, we're just getting started. We've been holding back. Biden was holding us back. Now we're really going to get going. We're going to cut off everything into Gaza and just completely eliminate everyone. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. And you have Toronto, Ottawa, I'm not sure if any other cities raising Israel's flag is beyond stunning. And I mean, it's just, I'm doing kind of a, I don't know, update. The Canada Israel book is being translated into French, and so I was asked, the translator and the publisher asked to I just do a sort of update, and basically I wasn't really sure how to go at it because 15 years or 16 years updating. I mean, it's kind of like do a whole new book, so it's kind of complicated. So I decided I basically just do the update kind of thing is just all on this question of upholding the law vis-a-vis Israel. I've discussed this many times on this episode and elsewhere, and the unique fidelity towards Israel. And it really is just, there is nothing else in Canadian foreign policy. There's lots and lots of lying. There's lots of violation of international law. There's lots of imperial policy by the Canadian government, but Israel really is a special, unique case. And I think the raising of the flags 19 months into a Holocaust is a stark example of that. A few other things on the Israel file. The Jewish National Fund, we're just Karen and I just putting out a action alert on them. They're doing all their Negev dinners, and they are using another registered charity. So they had their charitable status revoked, but they're using this other registered charity um, to provide tax receipts. So they're just continuing with their decades of rule breaking, tapping into the public purse, and so we're trying to press the CRA to immediately suspend the Israel Magnan charitable status, which is being used by the JNF. Now, of course, the Mondoise a week or two ago published this piece by Miles Howe, who's the researcher for Just Peace Advocates, who found that they didn't report $100 million they received. The JNF, so this is decades of violating CRA rules. Every type of CRA rule for registered charities, the JNF violated, and they didn't just violate once; they violated for years, decades, and even once they've lost their charitable status, they seem to be able to continue on in this fleecing of the public purse. The Canadian Jewish News has a piece that's like alert. I get their emails. They have an alert today. Canadian students and survivors shaken but safe after Houthi missile hits Ben Gurion Airport. And it talks about more than 250 Canadian students and chaperones and others, maybe teachers, who are in Israel on some sort of delegation as part of the Holocaust industry project. The Houthis missile, and this whole like, big worry, and there was a special email sent to the Canadian Jewish News about it. I was like, honestly, like every person in Gaza has had some like house blown up, family member killed, like probably the luckiest person in Gaza has only had like 50 strikes that were within half a kilometer of them or something like that. And here you have the Canadian Jewish News making a big kerfuffle, this big dangerous situation of these Canadian students at Ben Gurion. It's remarkable, and all the Israeli propagandists do this. Every time there's any marginal threat to Israelis, it's like the biggest kerfuffle about worry, and right down to the Canadian Jewish News. Now, the Canadian Jewish News had a much more interesting story that's, I think, quite it's illuminating, and it's somewhat positive. It's titled Canadian students. No, sorry, titled. I guess I didn't put the title down, but anyways, it's about Hillel Montreal. Big long story, and it's should I say Hillel McGill. Hillel is ostensibly the Jewish student cultural organization. That ostensibly. In reality, of course, it's a really Zionistic organization. And the basic point of this story in the Canadian Jewish News was that some Hillel McGill activist types are complaining that the Federation Montreal has taken over Hillel and basically doesn't let them get any money except for Israel-related stuff. So like, Shabbat dinners, cultural things, whatever, are like it's a real grind for them to get any cash to do those things. But if it's anything to do with Israel, the money just like flows. While the Federation fundraises like using Hillel. So like Jewish students, support Jewish students at McGill and Concordia, fundraisers. And then they just basically take the money and then they make it really hard for the Hillel to get funding for anything that's not Zionist related. Now, this is coming from, it's important here, this is not coming from IJV or Not in Our Name, or this is coming from explicitly Zionist pro-Israel activists. Okay, and they start off with this placard that they had a rally, or basically a pro-Israel rally, framed as hostage, whatever the Hillel McGill had. And the Federation brings in placards, the Hillel broader branch brings in which comes out of the Federation, brings in broader placards that say like something like, Palestinians killed the Bibas family, I think is what it was about. Not Hamas killed, but Palestinians. And so this Hillel Israel Zionist activist decided to like put that, which is the bottom part of the placard, put it in the snow so it was covered so no one got to see it, because basically it would be too incendiary to do that on the McGill campus. And the way they frame that is sort of like, we understand our own campus and they're it's top down, and so there's an element of that, but then there's also this element of only Zionist stuff gets funded. So that's I think it's telling. It's not surprising. It's telling that this is what, the Federation is like pushing the students to be more Zionist, and not just be more Zionist, be more hardline Zionist. And then the students who are already Zionists, but they don't want to go that far, and they also want some Jewish cultural elements. They're being, under resourced and whatever. Anyways, that's sort of, it's kind of a fascinating story about how the Israel lobby functions, but also it is, I think, a little bit of a positive sign that even the Zionist young Jews are not quite as Zionist as the older Jewish Federation. The um, there was the head of the Association des Médecins Juifs du Québec, Lior Bibas. He boasted that, so McGill got rid of its DEI. Three in a medical school a number of years ago. The medical school like got like sanctioned by maybe the Canadian Medical Association for basically being not enough non-white medical students and whatever, and some sort of fairly significant intervention, and very embarrassing for what was, I think, considered one of the best medical schools in the country or something. And so they brought in some equity, diversity type positions. There's these three people, all people of color. They got turfed just recently, and there's a story about it in the Montreal Gazette. And this McGill Lee, this Lior Bibas, the head of the Association des Médecins Juifs du Québec, which is the post October 7th creation. It's nothing to do with Jewish doctors in Quebec. It's Zionist Jewish doctors in Quebec. He's a fanatic Zionist. He basically boasts that he complained to the dean about one of these people who were fired, turfed, that they opposed the adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And so he's sort of taking, I wouldn't say taking credit for the DEI program being gutted at McGill medical program, but certainly suggesting that he contributed to it, which is part of this whole broader Zionist attack against, anti-racism, basically, attack against, civil liberties more broadly. And on that note, the kneecap, the Irish rap group that got the big kerfuffle around because they had, I think it was fuck Israel, something like that at their Coachella. Anyways, the big, I don't know, sort of music festival. I think it's an LA area. It's sort of a little bit of a lefty-ish kind of music festival, I believe. I don't know much about it. Anyways, they're playing the Vogue Theater in Vancouver in October, and there's an effort to have the Vogue Theater cancel their event, cancel their concert. And of course, there's big. I've talked about the authoritarian turn among the Zionist movement a lot. Now, I published a piece titled something like about a week ago or so. I think it was titled "A Jewish Community Authoritarian Turn" or something like that, and it goes through some examples. I actually wrote it quite a while ago, and it didn't get published for whatever different reasons. And anyways, what's interesting about this is that it's a huge debate within IJV, Independent Jewish Voices, over this article. And Sidney Nestle, who is a prominent player in IJV, I believe he's on the steering committee, or certainly has been on the steering committee, and his partner, who my impression is a little bit better than him, has been a big player as well in IJV. And he has his response to the piece is 41% of Canadians voted for an authoritarian turn. The vast majority of them are not Jewish. Let Yves berate the Métis community or whatever. Otherwise, he can just fuck off as far as I'm concerned. And then he goes on to say, yes, more Canadian Jews should speak out against Israel's crimes, and many are already. So Sidney Nestle is telling me, and this is not the first time, Sidney Nestle's this is going a little further, saying I should fuck off because I'm documenting how Jewish community organizations have gone to the right, gone fascistic, and are authoritarian. and what I find like fascinating about this is that like I honestly believe that like, it's the out of proportion element. Now, Sidney Nestle has every right to disagree with stuff I write, and honestly, he has every right to tell me to fuck off. In like a quasi public forum, it's this independent Jewish voices discussion group. What I find fascinating about it, and this is something that's been on my radar for like a decade, is that like if and it gets more fascinating as the horrors what we see Israel does grow, is that like if you were to put to a list of people that Sidney Nestle is like angry at, right? Like he would have like obviously Netanyahu and you'd have Trump and he'd have maybe the Israeli defense minister and then maybe Trudeau would be on that list or whatever Polio, I don't know, right? You have a list. You come in. The crazy part is where I would appear on the list of his anger towards, right? It wouldn't be like I'd be like number 10, right? I thought about I said this to people like in private discussions going back many years, is there would be people in the pro-Palestinian Jewish community who would like they would have like I would be, like they would have like of the people who are like the anti-Semites in Canada, I would be like number 4. Like they would have, I don't know who exactly top ones would be, but like they, which again, you can disagree with what I said. The big complaint in the IJV discussion group is that I didn't laud IJV in this piece, and I don't. I like people can read it, take it for themselves. I reread the piece. When you read people's comments and you start wondering like, what did I actually say? And you think, oh, it must have been so bad. And go back and read it, and it was like absolutely nothing. There's like nothing that approaching any problem. In my opinion, maybe IJV should have been mentioned as like, oh, and there is one Jewish group that has been opposing the authoritarian term. You can have a bit of discussion about that. It's so out of proportion. Even if you agree with that criticism of I didn't mention IJV in a positive light, the level of discussion is so out of proportion with the reality of the situation. And it's like I could list off a couple hundred Jewish organizations in this country. Like we have 300 of them that are registered charities, principally sending money to Israel, that are, openly backing the horrors in Gaza, let alone all the different schools, let alone the different community centers, synagogues, and others that are also backing the horrors in Gaza. And it's just like that's just like kind of like there's almost like no discussion. Like I said this about this Ruth Wise, who had this column in the Wall Street Journal saying that the Islamists have taken over Harvard. And then I did this piece that people can check out where I found she was from Montreal, and then right away I knew she went to. I was basically certain she'd gone to some pro-Israel Jewish school in Montreal. And then I look into it, and it's this Jewish school that's been around for more than a century, set up explicitly to promote Zionism. I'd never heard about, and it's wild. I'd never heard about it until like this is now 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, and it's like. So within this IJV discussion group that's like, back and forth with, bit of both sides, some bits I agree with, parts of some bits I disagree with about like what was in my article. But then there's like no discussion of this Jewish school that's like been a century long, like indoctrinating, cultivating, Zionists that gets $5 million+ a year in public funds. It's like so whenever you bring it to the question of like proportion, you bring it relative to like the other things, it's just so out of control. And again, I repeat, on the list of people that Sidney Nestle's angry with regarding to Israel discussion, whatever, I don't know where I'm on that list, but it's way, way, way higher than any sensible or logical proportionality would put it. And it just goes to the fact that I hate to say this at a certain level, there is a level of like circling the wagons, right? There's a level of there's criticism of Jewish organizations and even people in IJV. They take they take that like personally. They see you criticize Jewish organizations for promoting fascism, for promoting a Holocaust in Gaza, and there's an element of that that becomes, I guess it hits them within their sense of their Jewish identity. And there's a kind of an interesting dynamic with IJV there too, which is obviously IJV is a good thing. Obviously, IJV plays, broadly speaking, a positive role in combating Canadian support for Israel. It plays obviously a very important role in a defense of the criticism that all this is just anti-Semitism. And to me, that's principally what IJV should do, is just basically be a protection from the smear campaigns. That to me is right. But at the same time, there is an element of it that reinforces, I think, for some people, a Jewish identity. And I'm not sure that that is always a progressive thing. On maybe the final thing I'll mention is that this is, I think, kind of a little bit funny, but on the Israel rally here, which I think was on Thursday, on May 1st, I went to the Israel rally, and I got to ask a house father, who was the person I was expecting to be there and hoping to see. I was hoping Erwin Kotler might be there. I didn't see him, and I was also hoping that Neil Oberman and a few other people I was hoping for. Anyway, like I did see Neil Oberman, but as part of it, I went undercover. Right, I've done this at previous Israel rallies. Like, first of all, I put a hat, which I bought a hat for this purpose. And then right when I get to the park, I pick up an Israeli flag, and I kind of make have the Israeli flag very prominent as a way to be able to like mingle and take some time and people not see me as an outsider or whatever. Anyways, so then some people photographed me with an Israeli flag. And then it just kind of got going in these Zionist circles. So the Leviathan Twitter account did this whole big thing about like Engler has outed himself and he's long been our double agent, and now he's gone public that he's been working for us for this whole time. And then that Richard Martineau at the Journal de Montréal, who a couple of weeks ago I asked them about the genocide on the street and a huge kerfuffle, whatever. And then he has this big post about on Facebook about this, basically trying to say Engler's deranged. One day he's criticizing me for the genocide in Gaza. Next day he's running around with Israeli flag. So what begins is just this like sort of like me going undercover. And I have to say, I did want the flag. I in the past I have kept my Israeli flag. I figure, well, they're giving away a free Israeli flag. Why not keep it just in case I might use it? Maybe to burn it. Maybe to use it in different ways in the future. What was just a sort of thing then is clearly sort of blown up into this whole kind of like bizarre kind of smear thing. And I just wanted to say, I have well, maybe when I was young, I don't know, maybe, but in certain my politically conscious days, I've never been a Zionist agent. I've never been a Zionist double agent. And yeah, anyways, I'll leave it at that. And if anyone has any comments or questions, go ahead. I'll make Laura a co-host. I think you should be co-host now, Laura. And I think I see Yuri there as well.
Yeah, Yuri's got his hand up. Can you unmute Yuri?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Eve. That was a brilliant breakdown of all the crazy farcical stuff that's happening in the world. You are right. Coachella is in LA. Kneecap, the really brilliant Irish rap group. Yeah, they got in trouble for saying, F Israel or something like that. And currently, right now, they're actually in trouble in the UK because they have this funny protest song, very harmless one called "Kill Your MP." So they might possibly be prosecuted by anti-terrorism laws, which are notoriously very draconian in the UK and so forth. But I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you this. I recently just finished reading the late John Pilger's book, Hidden Agendas, and he devotes a lot of chapters to to East Timor. So I wanted to ask you about the East Timorese solidarity groups in Canada, because there was a lot of strong East Timorese solidarity groups in Canada that spoke out against Canada's complicity in the genocide that Indonesia inflicted on East Timor. And Amnesty International, this is when they actually did do some good work, was also very vocal about Canada's complicity in East Timor. But I've no a bit, but I've noticed why. But I've noticed what's happened with that sort with like why didn't back then, when you had such a big solidarity group for East Timor, why weren't they able to pierce through the myth that Canada's not a force for good in the world, and that, look, Canada's Canada's complicit in the suffering of East Timorese, and have a lot of the folks who were involved in that honorable work, have a lot of them sort of been like co-opted by the Canadian state in wanting Canada to quote unquote do good by lobbying Canada to be more aggressive on China and so forth. I'm curious your response to that.
I don't know enough. I mean, I know there was quite a bit of solidarity with East Timor amidst Indonesia's occupation and brutality. It predates my being politically engaged, kind of in the late 90s. And there's some books. There's a book. There's a whole book about it. I forget who it's by. Sharf, I think it might be. It's a pretty long book, decent book. I read it when I did the a black book, 15 years ago or whatever that is. And I know I'm blanking on her name. She did the really good film on Canada's role in Haiti, out in Vancouver. She was part of that. Yeah, I mean, I think there is some of the call. I mean, I think there's some of it is just, issue specific, and people. My guess is the vast majority of people who are doing that had also at previous time been involved in like South Africa, anti-apartheid, and maybe even some Vietnam, or so it's not like most of the people who are doing the work were probably coming from a broader leftist, anti-imperialist type thinking. But within that, it was a sort of issue specific, and probably there was some sense of this is just Canada is usually good in this one, and it's kind of how a lot of that plays out is that you focus on the one country, and then you just sort of accept the broader framing. But yeah, and then I know that forgetting her name out in
Ilan Briere.
Hélène Bédère. I know she was involved, like actually her relationship in Haiti was through her partner in an NGO or something like that. I don't remember the full story, but like so she went to Haiti some in some way via NGO kind of milieu, and so that might speak to I don't know, just taking one person I know of where they kind of involved in East Timor and then maybe got brought into the NGO world, and it so I don't know if there's some of that dynamic played out more generally. That is a powerful force, of course, in Canadian foreign policy, an under discussed force, of course, which is the role that the government funded and foundation funded international development and NGO kind of stuff plays in co-opting and driving people away from challenging Canadian foreign policy. But yeah, I don't know much more about that with the East Timor stuff.
Okay, Ifo, go ahead.
Hey, I love your analysis as always. I have two somewhat personal questions for you. First one is how you doing after the hug that you received from the bodyguard of the politician, and secondly, if you will be. I'm wondering if those of us who get if we should be charging them with assault.
Yeah, so today I went to a event put on by the Chamber of Commerce of Montreal at the Université de Montréal downtown, the HEC, the business school downtown campus. And I actually was not principally there. There was the economy minister of Quebec was speaking. I wasn't principally there for her. I knew she was going to be there. I was actually vice president of the Quebec pension plan was there, and I wanted to ask him a question about there's a Regis report came out. There's 27 billion from the Quebec pension plan invested in different companies, 76 different companies, assisting the genocide in Gaza in different ways. And I mostly wanted to ask that question, which I thought if I would, this is not a particularly prominent person, certainly wouldn't have any security with them. I thought he would be almost kind of happy for me to be asking him a question. Once he figured out the question, he probably wouldn't be happy about it. But it's not it would have been pretty quote unquote soft target if you want to frame it like that from my perspective. So that's what I went there for. But I also knew the minister was there. And anyways, I was sitting down at the cafe, just the building. I actually thought the minister was gone by then, and I just saw her come down the stairs. I just by chance look up, see her coming down, and so all Quebec ministers have a Sûreté de Québec officer with them basically at all times in public. That's not the case with federal ministers. So Stephen Guilbeault will often not have a RCMP officer with him. Sometimes he will, and obviously Trudeau will, and whatever, right? But it's Quebec ministers that always do. So even people who are like not really particularly prominent, and should I say, even often like the leader of the opposition, like Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, when he was at the climate march, the leader of Quebec Solidaire, when he was at the climate march, he had a Sûreté de Québec with him. So I went to ask him and Ruba Gassal question about Palestine. Anyways, but so I knew that about the Quebec minister, and actually, to be honest with you, that makes me a little bit like I didn't really have a big question I wanted to ask the Quebec minister, so I had more of a pertinent question, politically pertinent for the other ones. So anyway, so I was prioritizing that. Anyways, I see the minister come downstairs. She's walking outside. It's all totally calm. She's talking with someone. I walk out. I'm not walking out fast. I'm just totally whatever. Get outside the building. The Sûreté de Québec officer recognizes me right away. Don't think I've ever interacted with this minister. Recognizes me right away and is like, get back. I'm not even close to her. Then I'm pretty sure he's from the Chamber of Commerce security person, not so like an event security person, big dude. He grabs me, bear hugs me. He stops me, blocks me. Like I don't think I've ever had this happen to me. He just grabs me and like minister walks and then you can see in the clip I turn towards me. He's laughing as he kind of like lets go of me. I mean, he has no right to do this whatsoever. He's not even even if it was a police officer wouldn't have a right to do it, and he's not a police officer. He's not even like a security officer of the building. He's just like I think either just an employee of the Chamber of Commerce that's not security, or some security for the Chamber of Commerce. I don't really know. And then the Sûreté de Québec. Then I get out from this, and I'm walking on the street trying to ask the minister a question. And the Sûreté de Québec officer hits my phone, and the phone bounces all around. You can see the clip. I almost smashed my phone. Fortunately, I caught it. And it's just totally out of proportion. There's like no need. I actually bet she would have been fine with like listening to my question. When I call her name, she's willing to hear she's not like it's totally the Sûreté de Québec that escalates the thing completely unnecessarily. And they've done this in a few other occasions too. So the Sûreté de Québec basically has a policy saying that unstated policy, saying that they won't let me ask questions. So I've had a situation, I've gone to events where the minister, two different flacks for the politician, has like okayed me to ask a question. I wait 5-10 minutes, standing there's one instance, standing there, wait 5-10 minutes. Then I'm about to ask my question of the minister, and then the Sûreté de Québec officer who's with them recognizes me, sees me for the first time, and he's like, no. So the politicians are willing to have the question, or they're and then anyways, so it's totally like outrageous attack.
我知道他那教堂那个
Who's
他那个他那个
not
牧师的
muted
老
here?
婆
But
在
so
在那个加兰中心
I
跳舞，
can't see anyone not
我礼
muted.
拜四的
I'm
开
I don't know.
confused.
But anyway, so it's definitely dubious.
Thanks for so
I thought about sending. I talked to Dimitri about sending a letter to the Sûreté de Quebec to try to get them on the record saying, "Do you have a policy saying that Yves Engler is not allowed to ask questions of ministers?" Like, I mean, obviously they wouldn't admit that. I assume they wouldn't admit that publicly. And then if they don't want to admit that publicly, like, what's your policy? Like, you can't just sort of decide that this person is outside of bounds. Like, the politicians have the right to not answer questions, and the people who organize events, who own buildings, have the right to say you're not allowed into our building. But the Sûreté de Quebec doesn't have that right to sort of say like some blanket Yves Engler is not allowed to, anyway. So it's clear repression. The legal, I mean, the cops aren't going to do anything. The guy who I have more video of the guy, and he keeps touching me even after he bear hugs me, even after I'm like hassling about why did you grab me. I have a bit more video of him doing that. He doesn't care. He's just laughing, kind of like whatever. And I mean, that's how the police are going to react too. So, I don't know. Is it worth spending the time to push it? I mean, I got, the worst assault, the two assaults, the one by the rabbi 2.5 years ago at the UN Watch guy, whatever that guy's name, and where he punched me in the stomach, and then the one where the Heather Reisman event where the security guard like put a chokehold with his legs around my neck when I was on the ground. Those are the two worst kind of assaults that I've experienced. We did with the Rabbi Pupko, who actually I saw him on Thursday, and the guy's a weird guy. He comes and hugs me, and it was a total weird thing. But we asked Dimitri send a lawyer letter about the video for that, but we never pursue. We were going to pursue it like not through the police, but through a suit. But we never pursued it. I don't know. Should you? Shouldn't you? Part of me just thinks that like the cost of doing this stuff is to accept that you're going to get. I wasn't hurt by the guy's bear hug. I was annoyed. I would have been very annoyed if my phone would have been broken, of course. I wasn't hurt by that. Those two other times I was actually a bit hurt, but that's just the price of doing this. Yeah, anyways.
Okay, Hans, can you please unmute and go ahead? Hans, yeah.
Okay. While we're on the subject of Jewish activist organizations, the American IJV, equivalent to IJV, the Jewish Voice for Peace, had a very successful convention this weekend. And I don't think we should limit ourselves strictly to the Canadian context when we compare these two organizations. Jewish Voice for Peace in the States seems to be more militant, better organized, and frankly, getting more media exposure of the anti-Zionist point of view. For that matter, I think it took the Canadian independent Jewish voices 2 years ago. They were hesitant to call themselves anti-Zionist, which the American organization had no such conniptions. So could you try to explain why this hesitancy on the part of IJV? Because it does have very effective, outspoken people like the Larry and Judy Haven and many that I personally do not know. But let my cat out of the bag. I'm a supporter member of it, and I do make a monthly contribution to IJV more so than I do to the American organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this discussion about this piece I wrote in the IJV discussion, Larry Haven writes about basically he's making the point that like we're trying to be a big tent mass organization and having success in doing that, and then there's thousands of members, he says, of IJV members, and Eve's doing something different, which is like a individual commentator kind of dynamic that is has a different dynamic to it. So I agree with him in a important sense in that IJV is if it's going to be effective, it has to be a reflection of a certain political force among Canadian Jewry, obviously, right? It's not just like the perspective of like what of Larry Haven, which I think is probably much more anti-Zionist than others within IJV. It's not just the reflection of I don't know, whatever Palestinian hardline activists. It's not. It's a reflection. It's trying to be a reflection of a fairly big tent, the left, anti-Zionist or or um, or non-Zionist element of the Jewish community, right? And so I think it's been fairly effective in building that space, and I think that those who've done that work, including Sidney Nestle, who told me to fuck off, should be applauded for doing that work. I don't know how much of him, how much work he did in all this, whatever, but I know he's a significant player and whatever. Um, Now, so I think that's there's different currents. I mean, the Nestles have been some of the people who are the most ardent opposing to defining themselves as an anti-Zionist organization, and I think Nestle was a very active Zionist for a big chunk of his life, and that's the case with lots of people in the IJV world. I think where they were pretty pro-Israel for a long time. They may have even lived there. They may have made Aliyah, whatever kind of, like so. And that has to all be kind of like factored in. What I think we have to be cautious about is, and there have been times where IJV has a play. I said I think its main place is in providing protection from the smear that opposition to apartheid and genocide is anti-Semitic. That to me is first and foremost what it should be doing. That's overwhelming. The second thing it should be doing, and I think for the most part it's done a poor job of this, is done a fairly decent job of protecting from the anti-Semitism smear. It's done a pretty poor job in upending Jewish community institutions that are enabling apartheid and I personally I was always, I know the Zionism debate within IJV was considered a very big deal. There's lots of people who were like totally appalled. Lots of people won't work with IJV because they hadn't taken the position on the anti-Zionism. Personally, I thought that was kind of secondary. I think it's much more scandalous that IJV has not talked about all these charities. They've been really pulled into this very slowly, with the exception of the JNF. But even the JNF, that's not them starting that game. That's other forces getting the ball rolling and then IGV picking it up. They've been really, I would say they've been stunningly bad on Jewish schools. Stunningly bad. Nothing. All these schools, Tannenbaum chat, that are like have IDF days, nothing. Literally nothing. I mean, as far as I can tell, IGV's done nothing. To me, I'd prefer a group that said they didn't take a position on Zionism, but was really working to upend all the Jewish institutions that are enabling Israel, and so that to me, I mean, I think that the Zionism debate was more a reflection of the politics than necessarily, to me, that big a deal one way or another, whether they did say that or not. So I think that yeah, I mean, but I also understand that I understand Larry Haven's position that it's a big tent organization that is going to have different currents, and you kind of can't go. I mean, to some extent, you can't go that far from where Canadian Jewry is, and that now there are of course lots of people, Canadian Jews, who have had enough of IJV and like a kind of more to the left end, if you want to call it that, or like don't really anyway. So they're more anti-Zionist or more radical, whatever you want to call that exactly. They've chosen different political routes within that. One point I said, I think I made this point last week, and I repeat the point, I think that Larry Haven's comment goes, I think he's just wrong in this element to it, is that if no one criticizes IJV from the left, if they only get criticized from the right, if there's only like sort of, oh, they're just enabling the anti-Semites, if they're just a cover, they're fake Jewish organization cover for Palestine. But anyways, all the criticisms that come from the right, and there's tons of those criticisms, if they don't get if there's no push in the other direction, then obviously they're going to get kind of pulled in that way. And now it's of course important to be cognizant that you don't want to then be so critical, so hardline critical from a left direction that it leads to like busting up the organization or undermining the organization. Like, right, there's a tension there as well. And so you want to be critical, but still in a supportive way, and as a way of sort of pulling the organization into a bit better direction. Yeah, so there's tensions there, but yeah, I don't know how you navigate that, but yeah, I mean, it's I think there's lots of different currents within IJV, and there's people that I've known and done lots of stuff with, like Scott Weinstein. I've done stuff with on 25 years, that on Iraq war stuff going back early 2000s and stuff like that, and other issues not to do with Israel. But yeah, that's just the nature of the organization.
If we could conclude, I just have one very quick question. When you're talking about China, I mean, I know that 3 of China's largest oil companies have offices in Calgary. One of them recently established, the one that's, I think, purchasing a lot of oil, crude oil from Alberta. So this whole anti-China fervor, like, how does that, like, there seems to be increasing trade and we're exporting a lot to them. So how does that all enter into that? People talk about that?
I guess it would be a little bit of discussion, not that much discussion. Of that. I mean, a big picture, yes, there's tons of discussion of that. There was another thing in the Globe, I think it was, recent business section again, about in the context of Trump, we have to take, relations with China have to be prioritized and this kind of stuff. Somewhere else where there was that argument being made, another mainstream, I saw that this week. So yeah, that kind of stuff is discussed. There's been a lot of stories about the canola and China's imposition of tariffs on Canadian canola, and the impact that's having in I guess the Saskatchewan and in Alberta. I think mostly in Saskatchewan, maybe Manitoba. I'm not sure. But yeah, that big picture question of, and clearly, there's lots of people around probably Mark Carney himself, but other people within the Liberal Party that fully understand that there's, let's just do business, let's just keep the capitalist relations going, and including the oil, and there was a big part of the building pipeline to the West Coast is to potentially get more resources to China. But yeah, then there's the counter to that, which is the sort of xenophobia sweeping coming from Washington.
Okay, I think that's it. I briefly saw someone's hand go up, but it seems to have disappeared now. Okay,
Thanks,
thanks.
everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.